So officially, good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Chambers. I am a partner at Plant Moran, and I'm pleased to be serving as the 2021 Crew Detroit president. I'm also proud to be serving as a board member on the Crew Network Global Board of Directors. Today, we've got a number of new members who recently joined Crew Detroit, and so I wanted to give a special welcome to those individuals if this is your first Crew event as a member. I'm proud to lead this organization alongside a number of great women as fellow board members in pursuit of our core purpose of advancing women in commercial real estate. The Crew Detroit Board of Directors here as part of our event today is Kelly Herman, Tori Mannix, Lisa Robach, Rachel Smith, Kim Steiner, Tracy Taylor, Jennifer Thomas, Jacqueline Trost, Betsy Wagner, and Meredith Bin. The success of our chapter is also attributed to our generous sponsors, and we are very grateful for their support. Our major annual sponsors, whose names were rolling as some of you were joining the event this morning, at our capstone level is CBRE. At the marble level is Bedrock Detroit, Giffords Webster, Nightwatch, JLL, Level 1 HVAC, Plant Moran, Saxey Construction, and Spalding DeDecker. At our granite level, we have AM Higley Company, Hayworth, HED, Hobbs and Black Architects, Horizon Bank, Knorr, Redico, and Stantec Architecture. To show our commitment to our DEI initiative, Crew Detroit also introduced this year a new Onyx level sponsorship that brings equity and opportunity to our minority and women business enterprises. Please consider these firms as well when you look to do your next deal. At our exclusive Onyx level is Area, Rose Moving and Storage, T2 Designs, Testing Engineers and Consultants, and Ruby and Associates. Today's silver event sponsor is Signature Associates. Before we get into the program, I did just want to give a heads up to some upcoming programs that Crew Detroit is offering. We invite you to check out our website, crewdetroit.org, as well as follow us on social media to stay connected to the various events that we're offering. At the end of this month, March 26th, we're excited to host what we refer to as our U-Crew program. This is an opportunity to engage with college students to encourage and inspire them to pursue careers in commercial real estate. On Monday, March 15th, we are hosting Mentorship Monday, a short presentation on the 10 steps for effective listening. And then looking forward into spring a little bit further in June, the beginning of June, we will be offering our mugshots and martinis in a face-to-face forum at Bose in Detroit. That'll be June 3rd. And then June 28th, we will be hosting a golf social at Indianwood Golf and Country Club. So again, please check us out on our website. Those are just some of the events we've got planned in the near future. But we hope to see you soon and often virtually or face-to-face, a combination of both at future Crew Detroit events. So without further ado, it is now my pleasure to turn over the program to Lynette Boyle, Principal of Beanstalk Real Estate Solutions.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank everyone at Crew for their work putting this together. This was supposed to be a big in-person event at Mary Grove, and we were really excited. And Aaron and Jennifer and Maria, everybody had to sort of pivot at the big word of the COVID era. So we pivoted to do it online, and I think they did a really great job. I think the discussion is very timely post-COVID as we look at how we are repositioning real estate. I think it's a great topic, and we've got a great panel. Our company, Beanstalk Real Estate Solutions, is a Detroit-based woman-owned business. We focus on producing financial success for our clients through creativity, real estate expertise, and innovation. We work with a lot of clients that have had to reposition real estate. Our team is very interdisciplinary, and we build teams around projects. So we don't try to be one company that takes everything to one client. We sort of bring in outside parties. So we work with IFF, Rachel's group over at Marygrove. We work with owners reps. We work with different construction companies and architects, and we build those teams around the projects. I think we've got a great panel today. We're going to talk about, the old term was adaptive reuse, but repositioning. The topics will range from repositioning strip malls, buildings that are old historic buildings in Detroit, to suburban properties. Our panel includes Rachel Sikora from IFF. She's the Senior Owners Rep and Project Manager for their real estate department. Melissa Dittmer, who's the Senior Vice President with the Urban Design Strategy Team at Bedrock Detroit, working on really exciting stuff. We've got Duck Kim, who's the Global Hospitality Market and Design Leader with Stantec. And we've got Jeffrey Shostak, who's the President of Shostak Brothers and Company Real Estate. They've been around for many years and have done some exciting projects. We're going to start with Rachel Sikora. Rachel, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. So thank you, Lynette, and welcome everyone. Good morning. As Lynette mentioned, I'm Rachel Sikora, Senior Owners Representative with IFF's Real Estate Solutions team. For those of you who aren't familiar with IFF, we are a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution. And that's a U.S. Treasury designation for private lending institutions that are focused on providing affordable, flexible, accessible loan products for communities that traditionally have been just about shut out from the traditional commercial markets. And so community investment and expansion of economic opportunity in underserved communities are really guiding principles for CDFIs, and therefore guiding principles in IFS work as well. But in cooperation with our lending arm, we're also real estate advisors, developers, and we're a nonprofit. So we like to say that we're a nonprofit that serves nonprofits. And our primary market sectors that we focus on are early childhood education, K-12 education, community health, and affordable and supportive housing. So one of the projects that you'll hear me reference quite a bit during this, Lynette already has referenced it, I know it's a project near and dear to her heart, is the development of the new Early Learning Center on the campus of the former Marygrove College. And so the Early Learning Center will form the Birth to Five component of a broader Cradle to Career campus, the P20 initiative, we call it, that's forming on campus at Marygrove.
Thanks, Rachel. Melissa.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you today, and I just want to thank Crew and Lynette for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My name is Melissa Dittmer. Have recently switched into a new role at Bedrock. Bedrock is a full-service real estate company that is the real estate arm to Dan Gilbert's family of companies, headquartered in downtown Detroit, but we also have properties in Cleveland and in a couple other of the Quicken Loans cities. So recently I switched into a new role as the sort of co-leader and co-creator of the Office of Urban Strategy and Innovation. And so while Bedrock owns quite a bit of property, over 115 properties downtown Detroit, and if, like I said, a few in Cleveland, this office is really looking at the future of real estate through research and development initiatives and how we can be more innovative in our real estate strategies going forward. And that's very applicable to the conversation we're having today about repositioning real estate and then using the appropriate types of sort of equitable, inclusive, and resilient innovative strategies to reposition this real estate and move these cities forward. So I'm happy to be here, happy to talk about a whole bunch of different projects that we're working on, and I look forward to learning from all the other panelists as well.
Thanks, Melissa. Duck, tell us about Stantec and what you're doing.
Sure. First of all, thank you to Crew for the invitation and for everyone taking their time to listen in on us. I work for Stantec. I'm a principal in the global hospitality market leader. Stantec is 22,000 people large worldwide, but we offer a host of services and consultancies. I belong to what's called the Buildings Group, which is 4,500 people, so it's a little bit more manageable. And within the Buildings Group, we have engineering services, urban places, which consists of urban planners, landscape architects, etc., brand design, and then area that I focus on, architecture and interior design. As mentioned, I lead the hospitality market, so I work with a variety of our offices on a wide range of hotel and resort projects, but we also have a strong presence in many other markets, including but not limited to residential, retail, workplace, healthcare, education, government. And I know I'm missing a few, but we'll leave it there. In general, I think our claim to fame is our ability to execute on many aspects of a project, from urban planning, market analysis, architecture, interiors, branding, and engineering services. Some of the projects that we have worked on and are working on that are very relevant to today's conversation include multiple office to hotel conversions, particularly in urban settings in the Chicago area. Multiple mall repositioning projects. As we all know, the big box stores are taking a hit, and that's really impacting how developers are looking at malls, and we're very much into the thick of things there. And also a variety of other things in between as well. On a final note, considering this is Crew Detroit, I think it's worth mentioning that I'm a proud alumni of the University of Michigan.
Thank you, Doc. We look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. Jeff, tell us about you and what Showstack is up to.
Sure. Thank you, Lynette, and thank you, Crew Detroit, for having me. Happy to be here and join this great panel. Showstack Brothers, we are a fourth generation family owned and operated commercial industrial development company, founded in 1920. So we turned 100 in 2020. Wasn't the ideal year for a 100-year-old birthday, but we'll celebrate at a later date. We focus on everything, really in all the different asset classes, except kind of call it single family residential. We do office, industrial, multifamily, medical, and retail shopping centers as well. I would say our heritage was enclosed malls, large mixed use developments that had office, retail, and maybe hospitality component. Today, we're very active in the corporate headquarter, office R&D, call it high-tech flex built to suit space, which is one of the projects I'm sure we'll touch on today is why we bought the Palace of Auburn Hills, which we have demolished, and that is site ready now for new world headquarters for various different companies in the office, industrial, light industrial space. Then we're also very active in the distribution center space. It's been a big focus of ours as of late. So that's kind of the pitch on Showstack.
Sounds great. We're going to dive right into some questions, and I'm going to start with Rachel. Rachel, tell us, what was the driving force behind your project, whichever project you want to talk about, and how did the project come to fruition?
Sure. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the Marygrove Early Learning Center. We call it the ELC for short, so we'll just say ELC from now on. But it's really tough to talk about the ELC without talking about sort of a broader investment on the campus at Marygrove. So to set the stage for how the ELC came to be, it's important to understand that it was not developed as a project in isolation. It's part of a much larger neighborhood revitalization initiative, a place-based strategy that's really centered on providing high-quality educational opportunities. So for those who may not be familiar with Marygrove College or the P20 initiative, it is a collaborative partnership between Marygrove Conservancy, which is the steward of the real estate assets on the Marygrove College campus in the wake of the college operations ceasing a few years back, Starfish Family Services, Detroit Public Schools Community District, the University of Michigan, and IFF. And so this partnership was formed to chart the educational trajectory for children in the communities surrounding campus from birth to college, with also career readiness supports and other wraparound services that are really intended to embrace the children and families that are enrolled in the campus. But in a community like the one that surrounds Marygrove, it's a vibrant community, and there's a true richness of community wealth that already exists there when you talk about a revitalization strategy. But the one missing asset that was really important that we saw that was not maybe present in the strength that it needed to be was a high quality educational option. And making that investment in education really became an imperative for that overall investment strategy in the Live 6 community. So the driving force behind not only the Early Learning Center, but the P20 initiative overall was really a reimagining of neighborhood revitalization and the transformative role that high quality education provides from the earliest age and the impact it can have on community outcomes. So the concept, when we're talking about repositioning of real estate assets, the concept of the P20 was already formulating while Marygrove College was still in operations, but since the college has closed, the projects for the P20 initiative have really allowed the campus to remain a vibrant community asset. And it's positioning the campus in this new stage of its, the college has been an asset in Northwest Detroit for over 90 years. And so positioning the campus for 90 more years to come to continue to meet the educational needs of the community through an innovative model that's innovative not just for Detroit, but nationwide as well. So the story of why here, why Marygrove, it really is a story of a perfect storm of resources and commitment to create physical infrastructure, to create social infrastructure, to support child development from birth to career. So it was the result of a combination of data informing decisions, dynamic partnerships that really prioritized in education, and a concentration of financial resources as well in Northwest Detroit to create high quality learning opportunities. And one of the results in coordination and combination with other educational assets on campus is the Early Learning Center. And so it's 28,000 square feet, new construction. So it's excuse me, it's the one newly constructed facility of the P20 initiative. The other K-12 components and post-secondary will exist in existing facilities on campus. But it was important to establish the Early Learning Center as an exemplar for early childhood education facilities. So 28,000 square feet, 12 classrooms, 6 for infants and toddlers, 4 for preschoolers, 2 for flex classrooms to support enrollment shifts. But supporting 144 children that will be able to benefit from having that early investment in their lives and their education, beginning at birth through 5 until they matriculate through the other P20 partners as well.
Thank you. And I just want to add to that, that there's multiple architects, multiple different parties involved from a construction standpoint. And if you haven't seen the Marygrove campus, I really encourage you to check it out. It's really a work in progress that's going to be amazing. Next question goes to Melissa. Melissa, who were the key team members who moved your project forward, and what professional roles were brought in and at what point?
That's an excellent question, because I think what it speaks to is that it's never about one person moving something forward. It's typically requires a highly collaborative, very intelligent team of multiple players, of multiple disciplines to move any single project forward, let alone multiple projects all on the same timeline. At Bedrock, we've spent the past 10 years focusing on the renovation of historic structures downtown and repositioning those historic buildings towards new purposes that were relevant to today's workforce. And that has required a extremely strong architecture and design team, construction team, development team, and all of our partners within the community in order to be able to do those things. And what's interesting as we shift into this new era, sort of post-COVID, post-civil rights movements over the past year of 2020, is who are the players that need to be at the table to be talking about each of these projects as they move forward? And are they different than they were last time around? And have the conversations changed? So if you take a traditional real estate project, the ways in which we're looking at how we deliver that project and who we're delivering it to, and to sort of like what capacity, is a much different conversation now for us than it was before. We're just making sure that we have a larger and more engaged, more diverse group of stakeholders at the table to be talking about how each of our projects will fit within the entire portfolio, how this will fit within the city and all of the communities within those cities. And so that, we hope, will bring a longer life cycle or longer success to each of the projects, so that they are spanning more than just, the current purpose of what they are now, but can be used towards greater communities going forward.
Great, thank you. We're going to go back to Rachel for a second. Rachel, are there differences in financing a repositioning project versus new development? And can you describe some of those differences?
Sure. So this is a bit of an interesting question for someone like me who works with a CDFI, because for a lender like IFF, the answer is effectively no. There is no difference for us, because as a CDFI, our mission is to invest in people. And while we are investing in property as well, that's really an extension of that community-focused lens that we have towards lending. So we identify risk at IFF in much the same way the traditional lender might, but our mission is to ultimately bring capital to communities that need it. So we lean into risk in a different way. We lean in, we don't lean out, because we're working to find capital solutions that really meet the needs of nonprofits that don't have traditional options, perhaps, or if they do, they're expensive and really beyond their reach. So whether we're looking at repositioning an existing facility or a new development, the factors that are most critical to us are really mission alignment with the nonprofits that we're working with, and the ability of the borrowing nonprofit to make debt service payments through program cash flow. So we're looking at programs and impact. It's important to note that we are non-appraisal based, which is probably also a very big difference between us and a traditional lender. We're making lending decisions and underwriting almost entirely based on income approach and cash flow. So, the distinction probably would be important for a traditional lender to really own the line product and the market sector with the project that is looking for lending opportunities. Understanding the operating history of the borrower, the project team that's in place, the expertise to make sure that they're implementing work in a responsible way, whether it's an existing facility or new construction. But the rigidity of the criteria to assess risk of one project versus another is just probably, it's higher for a traditional lender than it would be for IFF. But it's also important to note that those criteria, they shift depending on the economic climate. So we're right now starting to emerge from a period where the markets were a little more closed. Opportunities are starting to open up again. And IFF is even seeing a bit of a different appetite in the market now than we had been for the previous year. And we're starting to see more competition, even among our nonprofit clients, good competition. I mean, we always encourage our clients to work with their primary lending institution to understand how they can continue to benefit that relationship. But we're starting to see more, excuse me, traditional lenders, our clients, sorry, our nonprofit clients actually moving forward with traditional lenders and not necessarily with us. So there is a loosening up and an opening up of the market now that perhaps we weren't seeing a year ago. But it's all obviously in support of nonprofits, and IFF supports that.
That's great to hear. Jeff, describe any abatements, tax credits, or other income incentives that you've used for a specific project, and maybe have that dovetail into some of Rachel's comments.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're all different. They're very, municipality driven, I think, as we all know. Generally, there are, of course, state and federal credits as well, but, usually it starts with a municipality. And if you have support there, generally speaking, the state will support it. I'd say what's most common, that we've used, I would say over the years, is the brownfield. Seems to be one of the most popular ones. Maybe it expands across, kind of the most areas of what it would cover, whether there's environmental concerns or there's obsolete building, parking garages. So there's a lot of different items that you could use that kind of fit in the brownfield bucket. Like on the Palace, for example, we haven't used any incentives as of yet. There's a lot of ways to look at it. With incentives, it's all just different buckets of money, really, at the end of the day. And with the Palace, what Auburn Hills has done really well with, for a long time now is, tax abatements that they provide to the tenants directly. Excuse me. So while that's not necessarily a credit we get on our development, but it is a tool that we use to help lure in the tenants when we might be competing with other cities outside of Auburn Hills, other markets across Metro Detroit, or even out of state. So, we try to balance it. I think, brownfield is great, and it's certainly very necessary on some of our apartment deals. In the city, you really have a big capital stack of a lot of different abatements and subsidies that help make those deals work. But I would say for traditional suburban development that, usually doesn't have the same complexities that you have downtown, different type of complexities. I mean, it's not easy, but you kind of got to balance out, what you think you need and what's going to best attract the tenants. And so for the Palace, for example, our view was, hey, let's go with the tax abatements. The city's done a great job of attracting users with that, because at the end of the day, if they pay less in taxes, it's just less that they'll pay at, total cost. And so that's kind of an area that it's very project, specific, so we want to see what's there, and then we'll make a business decision based on what's available and what sort of users we're trying to attract.
Sounds great. Doug, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to ask you, what kind of tools did you use and how did you do the research to determine the need and demand for a project where you had to reposition the real estate?
Sure. So, typically when we get involved on a project, the earliest we get involved, someone is in the process of doing the research. And where we fit in is, someone might be interested in a plot of land or an existing building. And we'll do the due diligence in terms of what they can actually fit, given zoning or variances and other logistics of the building itself. So, for example, if it's a multifamily residential or even a hotel building, we can plan ahead and figure out how many different types of units we can fit in, how many square foot of amenity space may be available, et cetera, et cetera. And then concurrently or thereabouts. Someone who specializes in market analysis and research will be doing exactly that study. Can this area support this type of use? And so if I just use a hotel, for example, hotels come in various shapes and forms, right? So, and various different room counts. So you may have a small boutique hotel with a room count of 60 or a convention hotel, with the size of 5,000 rooms. And you can see parallels in the multifamily residential market as well. Someone actually has to do the research in terms of, and the analysis in terms of whether or not that local market can support such a venue. And not only the number of rooms and the number of spaces available, but also the level. So for example, is it going to be a select service hotel, or is it going to be a luxury hotel or an extended stay hotel? All these factors come into play in terms of someone's pro forma. On the multifamily side, is it going to be, rentals? And if it's rentals, is it, $1,000 a square foot, or is it, $500 a square foot, and again, all these factors, play into someone's pro forma. So it's kind of in our involvement, it's kind of a dual pronged approach where, we'll do a lot of the studies in terms of what can physically fit into space, and concurrently someone doing the financial research on it, in terms of the type of property it is, the number of units, as well as the geographic region, so, and I just mentioned hotels and multifamily, but it pertains to a lot of other things as well. So we're doing a lot of malls overall at Stantec, malls repositioning. And with the malls repositioning aspect, there's a little bit of a different factor that goes into play in the market and research analysis. And we're involved on one heavily right now where a big box store has vacated the premises. So there's a very large space that's just an eyesore for this mall. There's an entertainment company that's very interested, and I have to talk a little bit gray here because of our NDA on it, but there's an entertainment venue that's extremely interested in taking up the space. It's a win-win for both, in my opinion, because the mall has a signature tenant that isn't dependent on competing with Amazon for sales, right? And this entertainment company has a location that may be very sustainable for the long term. But again, in this particular case as well, someone's doing a market study on it where they're looking at whether this venue, this use can be supported in this area, looking at the competition around it, as well as the geographic impact, locally, but also regionally. So, you're looking at a 30-mile radius, from a local perspective, and then outside of that, how many people are going to be willing to travel here from what distance? And so all these factors come, play into a developer's pro forma, and is really critical to their decision-making process.
Jeff, what types of challenges did developers experience, municipal or otherwise, and how does your team navigate those?
Wow, broad question. Lots of challenges. I mean, I think it all depends on what you want to do. I think, the biggest key, and I don't want to say like misnomer, but, with the development is, a lot of times municipalities have something in mind and developers have something else in mind. And yes, and Bedrock obviously does a great job at this. It's kind of like being a market maker, so to speak. But, a lot of the suburban developments, it really is, the users are the demand. And if the users are grocery stores or, the highest and best use is multifamily apartments or maybe a distribution center, that's what generally developers, want to build. And so a lot of the challenges is just getting all the different, players on board with the plan. And, a lot of people want mixed use. Well, mixed use adds a lot of complications. So I think, one of the most important, before a development or before you acquire land or some building is really making sure that you're on the same page with, all the stakeholders. That's the municipality, all the surrounding residents, because not that you can't work through it with different, those groups, but it's better going in to all be on the same page when it comes to, a large scale development. So obviously, if you're buying land that's zoned for, tech and research, you probably want to show up with deals that are closer, within that fall within that realm. You might not want to show up with, big box retail. So I just think one of the biggest challenges, you really have to know going in what the vision is for the community. And if you have a different vision, you really need to be prepared to sell that vision and why that is a positive. And then, separately, I would say, which is a big issue today, is construction costs are very, very high. And they've just continued to get higher. No matter what happens in the world, they're getting higher. And that's just a headwind that is against developers. Now, in certain product segments, it hasn't slowed down. Distribution centers really being the one that it hasn't affected, as rents just keep rising as e-commerce is growing, and COVID, made distribution centers even stronger than they already were. But construction costs are an issue. I mean, tenants will only pay so much. And if there's an existing building option, that's always great, tough competition. So, I mean, obviously there's lots of different challenges. You got to put a lot of parts together between financing and plans and whatnot. But I would say, top of my head, those are kind of the early challenges that you're always going to run into in a development that, you can't even get off the ground. And, developers like to move and get things done. You don't want to carry an old building, carry a piece of land for too long. You want to put it to work. So I just think it's very important going in, knowing what is available, what is out there, and what, the stakeholders want.
I think it's great that you touched on the community relevance. I know with Bedrock, they had to go through that with the Z deck because they put the deck up in front of apartments. And so reaching out to those apartment owners to say, hey, we're going to do this. It's important. It's PR. All politics is local. So on that same topic, Jeff, if you could have done something different with one of your projects, looking back, what would it be?
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard to say. You don't want to, always, it's hard to kind of Monday morning quarterback yourself and look in the rear view. Developers, we all make mistakes, and you want to kind of keep moving forward and not make the same mistake again. That's kind of the key. I would say it's just, a little bit kind of what I said. You have to know when you're going in, when you buy a large piece of land or a building, that it's not going to always be that easy to get everyone on board. And also things change, recessions happen and new leadership comes in, people get voted out. And so at one time, the plan might have been to do, some large form of, retail shopping centers. Well, recession happened and that's not in vogue anymore. And there's not demand, the cities don't want it. So I think it's, really focusing on, what development deals that aren't, too far out, sites that have utilities, that have, the proper entitlements in place, looking back, deals that lag are deals that die. And, so you really want to position yourself to be able to move quickly when you're looking at, a new development deal. I mean, we're all going to make mistakes. And look, if you made that mistake, George Washington is famous for saying he who made that mistake is, infinitely in a better position than the person that didn't, because he won't make that mistake again. So you got to think like that, because we will make more mistakes. Everyone does. It's just, you want to, hopefully they're not big mistakes, and, hopefully you learn from them.
Right. Rachel, what do you think is going to be the biggest impact on the community of your project?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the development of the Early Learning Center, along with other educational facilities that are planned for campus, is part of that comprehensive neighborhood revitalization strategy. And the collective impact of centering that investment in education in the revitalization effort will last for generations. Looking at the Early Learning Center specifically, though, when IFF first arrived in Detroit 7 years ago, we're headquartered in Chicago, we have a presence in the Midwest, and we came to Detroit to establish an office here in 2014. And one of the first steps that we took to really understand the early childhood education ecosystem in Detroit was to understand both the dynamic of supply and demand for early childhood across the city and in each neighborhood specifically, but also really understand the condition of the physical learning environments that were available to providers across the city and the children and the families that they served. And at the time, we found a very broken system and a lack of collective investment in that ecosystem that had created a 28,000 slot gap between supply of high quality early education slots and the demand for families. And beyond that, the system had really been set up to really fail to offer supports to create the physical environments that support early learning. So the ELC is really intended to be a disruptor for that dynamic. It's embedded within the broader education goals of the P20, but on its own, as that I mentioned, it's the only new construction project among the other P20 projects on the campus looking at K-12 and beyond. It's intended to demonstrate excellence in early childhood education facilities that support full day, full year care for children from birth to 5. And the result is really a thoughtful, data-informed decision-making to help narrow that gap between supply and demand, while also representing a paradigm shift for early childhood education facilities in Detroit. And so that impact will ripple outward beyond the campus, beyond the Live 6 community, and outward into Detroit. So I think it's really important in looking at the impact that the Early Learning Center could have, that it's offering a quality of opportunity in access to education to really launch children in their academic lives. But it's an approach that focuses not just on capital development, but also strengthening the systems that serve communities as well.
Got it. Thank you. Duck, with your project, did you all know that there already was demand for the kind of space you were going to be repositioning, or did you build it and sort of hope the demand would come?
Depends on the project. So typically, and again, this is typically, there's always an exception to every statement and every rule, but typically for hotels and multifamily residential, the demand is there. Developers are typically not going to take the chance of investing that much capital into something when the demand is not predictable. So for projects such as, again, multifamily, office, hospitality, they've done the market research, and the demand is typically there, and they'll build appropriately. For other projects, like a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in malls, we all know that malls are not doing so great right now. A lot of malls are not doing so great, and big box stores in particular are hurting badly. So you have all these vacant parcels of boxes and land, and developers are now looking to see how do you create the demand for people to come to these spaces. So now they're looking to us, to people like us, to create that demand for those types of spaces. So, it really depends on the type of project. Again, you got on the one spectrum, the market analysis research is done, and so the demand is going to be there. The other, we have to create it because the demand has disappeared for a variety of reasons.
And then the second part of that question is a little bit longer. We've seen a lot of movement in the retail sector, specifically large flagship anchors moving away from malls, as you touched on. With online shopping and brick and mortar being in less of a demand, do you see more interest in the redevelopment of these large footprint malls? What types of businesses are trending to take over these spaces?
Yeah, this is a very hot question right now with a lot of the stuff we're doing. We all know that the big box retail is hurting, as well as the traditional, brick and mortar malls. The likes of Amazon has truly been one of the largest industry disruptors in the history of business, period. That's having impact on the likes of Macy's, on Sears, on Best Buy. They're all withdrawing a lot of their real estate as we speak. So you end up with a lot of these anchor tenants in malls that are empty. So that's left a lot of mall owners scrambling to figure out what to do and how to attract people over there. I think the important thing to remember is a lot of the malls that we're seeing right now were built in the 70s through early 90s, and they weren't designed for the digital age and how people act and react nowadays. The smartphone didn't exist back then, right? And so you go to any place now, you see a bunch of people in their 20s and 30s, just all they're doing is staring at their phones, right? Well, not only that age group, but a variety of age groups just looking at their phones, and it's become something that you have to account for. So, I'll use a couple of case studies. The one project I just mentioned earlier, where there's an entertainment venue coming in, it's a win-win situation. The market is there. The market, the demand is there. It's a very well-to-do area that has a strong population of people that want to spend money and want to spend some money on things that are interesting. So that demand is there. From the mall's perspective, yeah, they want to bring in a tenant that's going to bring people to the mall, because the department store that used to be there withdrew, and it's doesn't have a good future in the first place. That's one small example, but another big example. Our office worked on a mall project in actually about 10 minutes from my home called Northbrook Court in the Chicago area, and it's a very large Macy's, which is one of the 4 anchor tenants, withdrew, abandoned the property, and it was left as an empty shell, a real eyesore for that mall. And the mall owner decided that they need to look at this differently. This mall was designed several decades ago with 4 interior piazzas, so to speak, that anchor the tenant, that are fronting the anchor tenants, and they're all identical. So it's just one giant circulation space to another giant circulation space. And what the mall owner now wants to do is they realize that the likes of Macy's and the other big box stores, their futures may be limited as well. The need to create a new experience, and I hate to use that word because it's so overused, but it's very relevant. It's not looking at interior design and architecture as a commodity, but truly as an experience for people to come to this mall to stay there. So the way I look at it is, it's the park of the 21st century, right? When you call your friends to go hang out somewhere, you may not hang out at the park. You may say, hey, let's go meet at the mall. And you treat the mall as like a meeting place, a place to gather, a place to socialize. And you need to treat it in that type of experiential way. So, and the dictate from this ownership group also was that they want to create a place where people want to hang out and gather and forget about the retail. The developer's goal is to provide the right mix of tenants, the right store mix, the right sizes, et cetera, and the right numbers to make the mall work from a financial perspective, from a leasing perspective. But you got to get the people over there first, right? And if the likes of Amazon is really killing and gutting your business, you got to have different ways to draw people in. And so in this particular case, they have completely razed or eliminated the Macy's, demolished it. They created an outdoor park area that is flanked by a bunch of food and beverage outlets. So they've immediately created a reason for people to come to this place. So they may come to this, meet up with their friends at that little park that they created in front of Macy's, or where Macy's used to be. They fronted it with food and beverage to draw people there. And then on the interiors of the mall, they create those 4 piazzas that are fronting the anchor tenants. They created experiential areas. So one is called the living room, the other one is called the park, and the park is the interstitial space between the outdoor park to an indoor park that leads you to all these other 4 nodes of activity. And so the circulation and the one's experience as they circulate through the interiors portion is very calculated to provide a new experience and a different experience for these 4 nodes. So that, again, people may be interested in going to the mall even when the stores are closed. So the logic behind that is you provide a new experience for people to show up, then they will spend money at these stores because they're there. So a lot of the mall groups that we are talking to, that our various offices are working with, such as our DC office, our Boulder office, and in Chicago, are really looking at it from that perspective, is how do you get people to come here and to sit here and to stay here? And it's not driven by just going to a store, because we know that model is failing right now. So on a larger scale with Northbrook Court, I talked about the park, how they created that park area and the restaurants and fronting that park. They've also taken the outskirts of the parking areas and put in multifamily residential, which seems to be a common trend too. Obviously, they've done the research to see that the local market can support the new number of units that are coming in there. But by creating multifamily residential adjacent to the mall, adjacent to this whole F&B center and this interior park that they've created, along with an anchor grocery store that's coming in, they've created a sub-community. So now you've created a sub-community here that can be self-sustaining, theoretically without a car for periods of time. You've also created a draw for outside of that immediate local presence and looking at a distance 20 to 30 miles out instead of just within blocks. So again, hate to reuse that word, but creating a new experience is really critical to drawing people in and keeping them there. And then that in turn will end up them spending money at the individual stores that are there. But looking at the stores as the initial focus has really ceased becoming the approach nowadays.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think you're right. And I think in cold weather climate areas, the recreation of the mall to become meeting space, a place where you can gather and do different things besides shop, makes all the sense. I'm going to pivot for a minute. I'm going to go off script, which is what I always do. I'm going to skip ahead and ask Melissa a question about how are advances in technology changing your role at Bedrock when you design? Really hot topic now.
So, as Rachel was talking about in both of her answers, she was talking about creating data-grounded decisions in order to move ECL forward in any of the programs and/or other initiatives that ECL creates. We have really pivoted towards trying to make data-grounded decisions in a lot of our real estate strategies, so that we are pulling in the data, we're synthesizing it, and keep in mind, we have had now only 10 years of data, but 10 years of extensive data of how some of our strategies have been working downtown. Strategies similar to what Duck was outlining for the malls are the strategies we've been putting in place in Central Business District to create a procession, to create an experience. And we have been pulling this data to then apply to some of our future strategies going forward, what works, what hasn't worked, and help inform those decisions. We've also been doing that in terms of how we've been repositioning some of our historic structures, and then some of our new construction projects like out at Brush Park. I think where it's going to get really exciting is when, as we start to be able to pull in even more data through open source data portals and others from across the city, using the city of Detroit, using DEGC and SEMCOG, it's starting to make sort of more localized real estate decisions based on regional data sets and the understanding of trends, market needs across the region, not just within the city of Detroit. And so we're using that through various platforms like ArcGIS, like Grasshopper, like what we call parametric modeling towards different efforts, both at an architecture scale and also at a sort of neighborhood and district scale. We're also looking at ways in which we can improve our stakeholder engagement through different types of technologies in order to get faster, live time feedback on things. So there's a lot of really exciting technologies out there that have only been started to be used in the real estate realm, that we're testing to see how we can use these types of things moving forward to have both, to create data decisions that incorporates qualitative and quantitative data. So, nerded out for a moment, apologize for that. But then all of that gets incorporated into beautiful designs that create a experience that entices people to come back, day upon day, week upon week, and year upon year.
Thank you for that. Rachel, what kind of city state compliance issues did you face with zoning, especially going from sort of a college campus with adults to then repurposing the campus for more K through 12?
Sure. We actually, we did not face many challenges for city approvals at all. Since this is a early learning center, we had to engage the city of Detroit for approvals, and we also have been working with the Bureau of Community and Health Systems as well at the state level to coordinate licensing of the center. But for us, from an approval standpoint, the process was really smooth because we were proactive from the beginning in establishing relationships and opening lines of communication with individuals and departments at both the city and the state level. So we were very intentional about getting in front of the city early, even when we just had boundary surveys and a preliminary footprint. But starting those conversations and concept planning as early as possible so that we could sit down with the department, present what we had on paper so far, and have them either confirm or reject or tweak our assumptions on the project. So we always erred on the side of over communicating And ultimately, because we had that level of engagement, the back and forth throughout the early site design and schematic design phases, we didn't have to ask for any exceptions, and that really paved the way for a smooth approvals process.
Got it. Erin, I have a couple more questions for Jeff, but I noticed we're running out of time and we've got a ton of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I think you can give Jeff one more, and then we'll start asking questions from the audience.
That sounds great. All right, Jeff. Where do you think the commercial real estate industry is headed over the next 5 to 10 years in Michigan? And I know that's a broad question, but what's your gut feeling? What are you seeing?
It's going to boom. I mean, I'm a developer. If we don't think that way, we're in trouble. I think it's obviously COVID had a major effect. So we get the question a lot, from people in the business, not in the business, what's going on with real estate, retail, office space, whatever it might be. So I think it's pretty asset class specific. I think as a general statement, though, this recession, if, whatever we want to call it, that came out of COVID is not, the global financial crisis of, 2007, 2008. Unlike then, banks, corporate America, big companies, Fortune 500 companies, you name it, they're generally financially sound, and there's not the credit crunch that we had before. So I don't think we're going to run into some, long-term, hold back, pull back, whatever you want to call it, because of COVID. So I think, the industrial distribution center, manufacturing, light industrial space will just continue to be very, very hot. I think the metrics are really strong there. It was a great space before COVID. And then COVID made it even stronger and better. Everybody seems to want a piece of it now, and big companies want more of their product closer to home, call it, nearshoring, whether it's in the US or at least it's in Mexico, it's close enough, but probably even more so in the US now with border challenges. Any project you talk about, any home project you're ordering, whatever you're ordering, there's supply chain issues. So I think people realize they want things closer to home now. Big companies do. I think the cities will come back, like the Detroits of the world. I think, once things, continue to open up and vaccine is distributed and people are comfortable again, I do think, cities will, continue to have the, the strong appeal that they had pre-COVID. The suburbs have generally done well. Multifamily in the suburbs is probably as good as it's ever been this last year, as, there was just, generally speaking, across the country, there was more things open in suburban lifestyle, and it was a little safer, more comfortable with people concerned about COVID. And I think office space will come back. I think the longer we've been home, it actually shows some of the diminishing returns of work from home. I think there are clearly in the beginning, everyone was in crisis mode, and there's some adrenaline to that. And I think people really buckled down, worked hard, got things done. And I'm not suggesting people aren't still working hard, but I think that as time went on and just different distractions, whatever it is, you can't grow by staying at home. You need collaboration, you need a culture, you need meetings, and that's just hard to do. And, especially for, corporate America, if you ain't growing, you're dying, you need to always grow. And as private entrepreneurial developers like us, we think, in that same ilk as well. So I think that office will come back. It's never been a strong segment in Metro Detroit in the suburbs anyway, but I think, in the built to suit kind of corporate headquarter flex, R&D office space, I see that coming back. It's still a very tight segment. There's very little supply when you're in that flex space where you need, both segments. And I think retail is very much, depending what you own. I mean, if you look at it, grocery stores did amazingly well. Discount retail did amazingly well. Obviously, some other areas struggled, a little bit more. Malls, got hit hard, although I think they're recovering. So, I mean, I think that globally, I think the real estate market is positioned much better than in other prior recessions. And I think, more micro in Michigan, I think there's enough good metrics here that there is, no more gas in the tank to kind of keep going what we had going prior to COVID. You look at all of the things going on in EV and automotive. This is an automotive town. No matter what else goes on, obviously, mortgage has been huge in this town, lately. But automotive tends to run this town, and with owning EV and a lot of what's happening there between the Hamtramck GM plant and all the contracts coming out for the new Hummer and things of that nature. I think that there's just going to be a lot more growth opportunities here that come out of that. So like I said at the beginning, I have to be optimistic because otherwise what am I doing? But I do think we are, hopefully positioned, for a couple more years of some good growth here.
And I think we're all ready to wake up from our long winter's nap.
Yes.
Right. Well, I really want to thank our panelists. This has been great. Erin, do you want to do some Q&A?
I'm actually going to get started with a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So thank you, everybody, and everybody who's submitted questions so far. The first question I'm going to pass off to you, Lynette, actually, to see if you can identify for us some incentives in the city of Detroit. I think people are very curious about that.
Well, there are different groups. There's Invest Detroit that I would work with. DTE has a ton of energy grants. And, when I was with Bedrock, I think we got over $500,000 worth of grants just in our first 2 years. Now the program is much more robust. So if you're a business based in Detroit and you're trying to do some renovation work or a developer, they will almost pay 100% for some of your LED conversions. Your boiler, there's the boiler incentives for replacement, air conditioning, roofs. There's just a lot of energy saving grants and opportunities. Charging stations, tons of incentives to put, EV charging stations in your properties. There's tons of programs for groundwater, for ways to address groundwater costs and charges. That's a big issue when you develop in Detroit, if you have a lot of green space. I would ask Melissa. I mean, Melissa probably knows even more because she's so immersed in the Bedrock development world and they have so much going on.
Well, Lynette, I think I can springboard off that pretty easily because that is something that we are tracking currently is the projected trends of incentives as it goes forward. And if, I tie in what Jeff was saying about the future of real estate, I think one of the biggest trends that we're going to see on the future of real estate coming out of Biden's administration is a much greener, more sustainable future real estate that is heavily incentivized for those who are willing to be more progressive. And that's true across energy systems, across water and stormwater management systems. And so what's going to be really interesting is this convergence of public policy to capture some of these incentives and then how the real estate market is going to respond to that. Because all the things that you listed, Lynette, are still there, but we know they're going to be amplified and evolved quite a bit more based off of what we are going to see in the next probably 12 months with Biden's infrastructure and sort of real estate incentivization bills that go forward. So it's pretty exciting to see that coming and what that's going to mean for Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Even when we discuss mobility and what it means in terms of transportation initiatives across Southeast Michigan, we have the potential of really making our region and our cities more sustainable if we can capture those incentives. So,
and I just want to say one last thing about that. Robert Matlar had put a question in the chat, and Robert is the new PACE representative locally, and we had a good conference call with them the other day, and PACE has come a long way in being much more accessible and doing much more. I think for a while, developers would meet with the guys from PACE and say, okay, it's interesting, but after hearing the new spiel, it seems much more interesting. And I would encourage people to meet with Robert Madler and hear about the new PACE program.
Awesome. And that was kind of where I was going to go with that, was into his question. So I will actually switch it up a little bit now. With one of the more recent ones that have come in. But how do you think that the Detroit market is perceived versus other cities bringing in new investors post-COVID? And I think, Doc, if you could kind of speak to this one, I think that would be a good kind of place to start with that one.
I might have to pass on that one. Just full disclosure, I'm not as familiar with the Detroit real estate market, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that.
Maybe Jeff.
All right, Doc, whatever you say. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, Detroit, clearly has had a lack of institutional investors, in the city of Detroit for a long period of time. And then, we got active there in the early 2000s, and we developed Lofts Merchants Row, which is about 200 apartments, 2 phases. First phase, 2004, and the second phase, I think it was 2015, 2014. And I would say in the last 10 years, obviously, Bedrock, really put Detroit back on the map again. And I would get a lot of calls from, I don't necessarily know institutional investors, but certainly out of state investors that appear to have lots of money, and we're looking at doing deals in Detroit. So I think Detroit was perceived, as a place to do urban type development that was going to be a much easier place to get into. The barriers of entry would be less, and it would cost a lot less money. I think that was the perception for a while. And we started to see, some of them coming in, but it didn't seem to actually, a lot of them didn't end up, doing redevelopment deals. Maybe they bought some properties and they have since, they sat on them, maybe they sold them, some of the deals happened. So I think Detroit had the perception, call it pre-COVID, of being like, okay, Detroit's cool, got this tech thing going on. We've got all these new buildings getting renovated, these new projects. So I think overall the perception actually was good in the city for the first time in a while, where we were getting calls from all across the country, from different people that wanted, a piece of the action. And I don't think COVID will, end that. I think it definitely put a halt on that. But I think as, the projects, get restarted and people are back at the office, which I think is the key, you got to come to Detroit and visit it, and you got to see people on the streets. We didn't have that for however many years until Quicken Loans moved down there and all these other companies moved down there. And all of a sudden the streets were happening. Somebody would visit and say, wow, this is a fun place. I would like to do business here. And so I think once that happens again, multifamily development is still one of the most popular developments across the country. And people love the urban markets, and there's tons of institutional capital chasing it. So I think Detroit's perception has been so much better in the last 10, 15 years. And I think it will have that same similar perception from out-of-state folks that will want to be in Detroit doing business again.
If I may, something else that we seem to be tracking is that due to the pandemic, most East and West Coast headquarters corporations realize that they no longer need to be just on the East and West Coasts, that they can create regional headquarters so that their talent can live and sort of work anywhere, right? I mean, if that's what this past year has taught us, is that we can do that. And so we are starting to see that some of these corporations are considering opening up more regionalized smaller headquarters within Detroit, within some of these other cities that they wouldn't have considered having satellite offices in before, because the talent wants to be there, and they can work from anywhere. So, to what Jeff was saying, we're hoping to expand upon the efforts that have already been in place in terms of Detroit's narrative and Detroit's intrigue, but then capture even more of this coming out of COVID on the other side, as it relates to the future of how corporations work. So it's exciting. There's more to come on this. The story is not over yet, right? We just concluded chapter 1, I think. Maybe. We'll see.
Well, we have a few others that have been coming in, and I'm not sure who to give this one to. Maybe Jeff, maybe Lynette. We'll see which one of you bites. With the growth of the industrial sector, do you see continued redevelopment of blighted areas in the city of Detroit?
That is a tough question. Let me get my crystal ball out real quick. What I will say is that we see a lot of developers right now buying land, especially over Corktown, Delray area, over by Eastern Market, buying up the land and kind of looking at it as an investment tool right now, in hopes that that is what's going to happen. I think you're going to see kind of like what Doug was saying, you've got Eastern Market where you've got all these little restaurants and shops and a lot of land around there, and you've got the DeQuinder Cut over that way. So my guess is you're going to see a lot of that land start to get developed with more affordable housing. The market supports the housing supports the market, that whole concept, and like sort of right outside of the CBD. What I'm hearing from a lot of developers and the city of Detroit is that the residential high-end stuff downtown is getting oversaturated. You know, we watched condos go from $75,000 sales to $685,000 sales in 5 years, right? So the values went through the roof. Now you've got a gluttony of apartments downtown on the market that are really expensive. We don't have enough Class B stuff that just a kid out of college can move downtown and get an apartment that's affordable. He may say, I don't need, you know, all those crazy amenities and, you know, meeting spaces in my building. I just want to live downtown. So I think that some of those areas around Porktown and around, you know, Eastern Market, Midtown, you're going to start seeing some of that land. You're going to see new construction, but it's going to be very affordable, like the micro lofts, you know? I mean, what do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe answer the question a little differently from, you know, more of an industrial kind of viewpoint. Is I think that there is not a lot of options in the city of Detroit for industrial space. It's generally very old, antiquated type product. And, you know, with, you know, the new FCA plant, with the retooling of Poletown, you know, GM, Hamtramck, there are a ton of requirements out there for the, you know, to the supplier base, to the OEMs, to be in the city, to be near the plants. So I think from a blighted areas, more like the neighborhoods and places like that, I think that if there's opportunity to, you know, the challenge is always in the city is to put together, assemble enough land to make it, you know, to put up a building, you know, that works of any size. But I think you will start to see in some of these more blighted neighborhoods where there's the opportunity to assemble some land, that there is the clear demand for industrial real estate in these areas, and which is, you know, generally a good thing. It'll bring jobs to these areas. It'll, you know, I know FCA hired, I don't know the exact numbers, but a lot of it, you know, was Detroit folks. And so I think you'll start to see that because of the automotive industry, but then you'll also see it a little bit too with e-commerce, a little more challenging with e-commerce because they need a lot of land and the buildings have to be very particular, but they also need to be around the people. And for the last mile logistics, you know, they need to be in population centers. So I think that some of the blighted areas that have maybe been ignored from a development standpoint, and yes, some of them might end up being residential, like you described, Lynette, but I think there is clear demand for, you know, B to A industrial distribution, light manufacturing, assembly plants in the city to support all this new growth coming out of the city from the OEMs.
I think Rachel wanted to comment too.
No, I'm sorry. That was a that was a Zoom faux pas. My apologies.
Well, I'll move on to another one that's probably another crystal ball question, but everybody's curious about what's going to happen with restaurants coming out of COVID. And I wondered if any of our panelists have any intel on that. One specific question was, are the ones that closed going to be replaced by other restaurants or repurposed? Is this a zoning question? Do we see restaurants coming into some of these industrial properties that will be purchased in the wake of?
I could take that. Sorry, I could take that a little bit. Unfortunately, that's probably one of the most hardest hits and most heartbreaking of any of our industries. You know, 2 months into the pandemic, you know, 40% of all restaurants in the United States were shuttered, whether temporarily or permanently. If you think about the average restaurateur, and I'm not talking about the ones who are, you know, cash happy, but the ones who are, you know, the average Joe Schmo restaurateur, you're looking at typically about 30 to 90 days of operating income, you know, to sustain yourself if you were to shut down. So, you know, we're well into a year now. You know, think about all these restaurants that are in a year without much operating income or at a very reduced rate of operating income. You know, it's not pretty. As a market in general, it will survive. It will come back. You know, this is a temporary a bump, albeit a very big one. So the market will come back. But unfortunately, at a personal level, there's millions of people that are directly impacted in a negative way and will be impacted for a long time. To open up a restaurant takes significant amounts of capital expense. Kitchen equipment, the engineering that goes into it is significant. And so, once you shut down, to reopen in another space is extremely expensive. So, in my opinion, I expect a lot of the restaurants that are shut down to be shut down for good. That's not all of them. A lot of them will come back. I know a lot of my favorite restaurants in the area here have shut down permanently. Some of them have shut down temporarily and reopening in the summer, as they say, when they have more outdoor space available. And it's not just about the local laws as well. Right now, most restaurants in the United States are operating at 25 to 50% occupancy based on their local laws. That puts a significant dent in it, right? And people are waiting until the summer. A lot of people are waiting until the summer months where outdoor spaces can be had for dining to open up, more revenue opportunity. But until then, a lot of the restaurateurs are kind of, in survival mode and severe survival mode. So I don't expect a lot of them to come back. There's a lot of stats that are being thrown out there. So it's hard to say which one is going to be the most accurate one, but there's a lot of people throwing predictions out there. And it seems to me that the most prevalent one is somewhere hovering between 25 to 35% of restaurants currently are not going to reopen. And that's a significant staggering number. Now, when this all stabilizes, as I said, I think the market will come back. People are going to have a lot of pent up demand to eat out. I mean, I certainly have an enormous pent up demand to share a martini at a bar, with a friend. So I'll be the first in line. But, not only do you have the current health pandemic, the local jurisdictions, restricting the revenue opportunity, but also, people's confidence levels, right? That has to rise as well for the market to get back to normal. But again, it will get back to normal. It's just going to take some time. But in the meantime, at a personal level, it's going to hit a lot of people very hard. There's going to be new players that come in. And to kind of directly go back to the question, a lot of these spaces for people who are shopping for a new restaurant, yeah, it makes perfect sense to go into the space that used to be a restaurant, primarily because a lot of the engineering is already there. It takes a lot of expense to put in grease traps, to have mechanical hoods at the flow rate that's acceptable for the particular restaurant. But even then, there's a lot of expense involved. Kitchen equipment is going to be tailored towards the type of food that's being served. But again, it does make sense to go into a space that used to be a restaurant if you're going to create a restaurant, just because of all the engineering that has already taken place. But I do expect a lot of the other spaces to be repurposed as well. So, no one has a crystal ball, but for the short term, the restaurant business is suffering immensely. But like a lot of the other markets, it will come back. It's just that, there's gonna be a lot of different people involved and a lot of recovery to be had.
I think we can all agree we're all looking forward to some warmer weather to go outside and enjoy like a martini and a cocktail or on a patio somewhere. So thank you, Duck. One of the questions that I'm going to pull is I'm going to propose to the whole group, and maybe we can respond to this in the sense of, so what are some of the biggest gains that you've seen in real estate in the last 5 years? This is from Meredith, but maybe we can talk about the gains pre-COVID and then maybe talk about as well the industries and areas that we've seen gains, during COVID as well.
I'll go first. I think that, and Rachel, tell me if I'm right, I'm seeing a lot of movement in the nonprofit sector. Beanstalk, we did not set out to be a real estate management leasing company for nonprofits, but that's what seems to be happening. We're getting more and more calls from nonprofits that own their own property. They either want to bring in new tenants, they want to renovate, or they want to sell their buildings and move to something else. I think there's a lot of expansion and a lot of new nonprofits starting up right now. I have to tell you, 90% of the business we're getting is from nonprofits. And again, we couldn't have predicted this. And we didn't set out to go find it either. It's just coming to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on, Lynette. You know, IFF in our work as you know, both at our lending and our real estate advisory services, you know, we work directly with nonprofits that are looking to invest in their communities and their programming and finding that alignment with facilities that are truly supportive. We lead with the tenet that programs drive facilities and not the other way around. And so, especially now as we're looking at you know, COVID times, the need for nonprofits to lean into this moment and be able to support communities that are very distressed is having them sort of evaluate their own capacity and their potential to do more. And so we have a lot of nonprofit clients that have continued to thrive in this environment, and that has not necessarily been true across the board, but still an opportunity for them to grow and continue to invest in themselves as an organization, invest in the communities. And then because we're a lender and an advisor that is specific to facilities, we're really working to support them in expanding their physical footprint. You know, moving into larger buildings, looking at expansion of existing, moving into ownership positions and being supportive of nonprofits that perhaps had been relegated only to leasing opportunities and perhaps wanted to own and are now in the position that they can start to pursue those avenues as well. So we certainly do, as again, the nonprofit that serves nonprofits, that is something that we certainly track and we're engaged in, and we have seen growth there as well.
Thanks for that. Another question here about P3 with regard to repositioning specifically. Doc, you might know more about this on the global level that you could speak to, and I don't know if Jeff or Lynette could jump in on the Detroit level, but are we seeing a lot of P3 when it comes to repositioning real estate?
I personally am not at this time. I mean, it could be a factor of kind of the markets that I'm personally in, but I personally haven't at this time. I don't know, you know, the reasons behind it, to be blunt. And again, maybe Jeff or, you know, Rachel can speak a little bit better to that. But in the markets that I'm in, I haven't seen a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's clearly something that's out there. But, you know, like anything else, it just adds more complications a lot of times. So I think there's, you know, public-private partnerships maybe that aren't as like concrete as, you know, like a full-on, but every development deal is a public-private partnership. But as far as, you know, like specific P3 type of sorts of things, I'm not running into a lot of it. You know, part of that is obviously Detroit has, you know, slowed for a minute here with COVID, and I think you would see it more there than you would in a suburban development, which has obviously been more active in this past year. But that's just my kind of what I'm seeing.
What I am seeing is Detroit is heavily willing to invest in affordable housing. So for developers that are doing residential, multifamily, they're bullish on low-income housing. And those are the people that are getting the financing right now and having some of that partnership.
Great. I feel like that's always a complicated one to answer. So thanks for trying. The last question that sort of snuck in, Duck, was during your response about restaurants. And I'll admit I had to Google this when this question came through, but somebody was asking about the concept of ghost kitchens and real estate being purchased or repurposed to create ghost kitchens or cloud kitchens to support the virtual ordering of meals and delivery at like a kitchen that is professional food preparation and cooking facility set up for the preparation of delivery only meals.
Yeah, so if I were to be a fortune teller, I'd be a lot more wealthy than I am now. But with that caveat, that's a trend that I expect to continue. You know, this pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of the trends that were already occurring. So, you know, especially in the real estate market. So, you know, a lot of the trends well, let me back up for a second. Starbucks, for example, it's well known and it's been in the news that they're withdrawing a lot of their real estate in the sense that they're not, decreasing the number of openings, but they're rethinking the number of their openings. So, for example, in heavy urban areas, they may not be leasing the space required for people to sit down and have a chat, but just doing takeout, right? And how many people in urban areas actually sit in a loud cafeteria area? Some, but most of the people, if you look at the lines, are grabbing their coffee and their pastry and getting out of there, right? Whether it be lunch or breakfast time. So Starbucks, has started on the path of reducing the real estate to cater only to carry out, and reducing their seating requirements. Now, I bring that example up because I think you see a similar trend in a lot of the other places as well. During this pandemic, when you look at the likes of a lot of the restaurants that do carry out effectively, they're not hurting nearly as bad, and in fact, some of them are doing quite well. And I think we've all seen kind of the lines at various places, depending on your region. When I drive by Chick-fil-A, for example, I'm not even going to stop to think, I'm not going to consider getting a chicken sandwich because I'm not going to wait 20 cars in the drive-thru to get one, right? So some places are obviously doing okay, but a lot of the restaurateurs, that are really trying to hone in on the carry-out business and Uber Eats and all these other trends that are happening, yeah, the ghost kitchen is an effective way to reduce their costs and effectively execute on their offerings. So that's a trend that I certainly saw happening prior to the pandemic, and personally, I see that continuing after the pandemic.
Right. It seems like there might be some trends that were born during the pandemic that will stick around for a while. People look at it regardless of safety.
Right. And as I said, I think that trend was already occurring, but the pandemic really kind of pushed it into a greater direction.
Right. Right. Well, with that, is there, or can you think of any other trends specific to real estate that will stick around after COVID that might impact the communities in which these places of real estate are?
I think one of the things that I've seen is a lot of mixed uses, and that was a trend that started prior to COVID, and I think it's going to continue well past COVID. So, for example, the hotel industry, the going joke for me was, for many years, hospitality was trying to bring residential in, and residential was trying to bring hospitality in to their design ethos. So there's already a little bit of mixing of uses in the mentality of it. But what was really happening prior to COVID was, the hotels were looking at the WeWork model and realizing that workshare was a hot market. And so a lot of the hotels were already looking at potentially leasing out bandwidth of Wi-Fi in their lobbies, as local residents would camp out in the lobbies and utilize the hotel's Wi-Fi, and they'd pay, an hourly rate or something to utilize their Wi-Fi, even though they may not be staying at the hotel. Likewise, a lot of hotels started looking at potentially using rooms as work share environments. So, this has already started prior to the pandemic, and I see that continuing post-pandemic, probably in greater numbers. Again, mixing of uses.
Great. Well, this puts us right at 10:30, which is the conclusion of our event. So I just, before we sign off, thank you to our panelists. What a great job you did. And to all of our attendees. We're going to try to distribute a link to the recorded version of this. Give us maybe a week or so. And crewdetroit.org/events to see details on our upcoming events. And I think that should do it, in case our panelists or moderator have anything else to add.
Thank you all. Great job.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.